Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and today I'm going to do my August wrap-up. So I read 11 books in the month of August, which I am surprised at. I thought I had read much less than that because some of them were very, very long, but some of them were also quite short, so that's probably why it evened out at a fairly usual number for me. So let's get straight into the books. I will start off, as always, with the classics. This month I read a tiny little black classic. This is Shen Fu's The Old Man of the Moon. I quite enjoyed this one. It's a Chinese classic from the early 19th century, and it basically is a man telling the story of his life and his relationship with his wife, in which the moral is kind of, don't love too strongly because that will potentially result in tragedy, which I've had some difficulty with at times. I really enjoyed the writing style. It'd be interesting to read something else by Shen Fu, but to be honest, I didn't get sort of too much out of this. It was a fairly standard 3-star read for me. I read this for the Booktubeathon and it was a quick and fairly easy read. This month I finally got round to starting Anthony Trollope's Palliser series and read Can You Forgive Her, which is the first book in the series. So the Palliser series, like the Barsetshire Chronicles, which I've read before, are a series of like interconnected novels, and some of the characters in the Palliser series do also connect to some of the characters in the Barsetshire Chronicles, just for extra interconnected joy, because Anthony Trollope is glorious. This book was absolutely incredible. I loved it so much. I am really coming round to loving Anthony Trollope an awful, awful lot. I'm not saying that he would beat Dickens or Jane Austen or Elizabeth Gaskell, who are my favourite 3 authors, but he's up there. He's like number 4. I like him quite a lot, and I really need to get on and read some more Anthony Trollope because I would love to read everything by him, and he wrote nearly 50 books and I've only read 11. This book, Can You Forgive Her, which I should probably stop holding up because it's probably creating weird glare effects because it's a library copy and very shiny, but this book, Can You Forgive Her, is absolutely amazing. It follows chiefly a young woman called Alice Vavasor, who at the very beginning of the book is engaged, but she's starting to have some doubts about whether or not the man she's engaged to would really suit her. She loves him, she admires him, she respects him, but he is quite quiet and solitary and wants to live a kind of quiet, calm country life, and that is not perhaps what Alice wants. She is a bit more ambitious. And then she also starts to spend a little bit more time with a young man called George, who she used to be engaged to, and everything kind of goes on from there. And the basic premise of the book, the title Can You Forgive Her, is can you as a reader forgive Alice for the way she behaved in this book? But actually, although Alice is the her specifically referred to in the title, there are several other characters in this book that are requiring forgiveness as well. And one of my favourite characters in this book, actually, a woman who, like Alice, makes quite a lot of mistakes, is a woman called Lady Glencora. And I thought her plotline was done really, really, really well. I also love Mr. Palliser. Mr. Palliser is a wonderful, wonderful character. Anthony Trollope is brilliant at writing about politics, of which there is quite a lot in this book. He is also brilliant at writing about family relationships and love and marriage, and very, very brilliant at writing about marriages of people who perhaps shouldn't really be married and are not very well suited to each other, but have to kind of get by and make something of it anyway. I think he is a really, really, really talented writer, and just like, I can't recommend this enough. I did feel that the ending was a little bit too long. Like, there was one plotline in particular that I felt was like wrapped up and done really brilliantly and then kind of like carried on for another 100 pages. But in the spirit of forgiveness, which this book encourages, I don't care, because the characterisation is so strong, the writing's so good, so funny, so witty, so marvellously entertaining, but also so moving and poignant at times. Like, Anthony Trollope is just a master storyteller, and I can't wait to read everything by him at some point, even though he wrote a lot of books. So yeah. Another classic I read in the month of August is The Kindly Ones by Anthony Powell. This is the 6th book in his 12-book series, A Dance Through the Music of Time, which I'm currently hosting a 12-month read-along for and absolutely love. I'm not going to say too much about this here because it is the 6th book in the series, but if you're partaking in the read-along, I do have an individual book review / discussion video, which I will link down below. I really enjoyed this one, as I enjoyed the whole of the series. It's a brilliant series spanning from the 1920s to the 1970s, and looking at kind of social change and political change and kind of contrasting domestic and political / international affairs in a really beautiful, glorious way. And I also read a modern classic this month. This is The Road to Litchfield by Penelope Lively, which is from 1977, I believe. This is one of the Penguin Essentials editions, and they sent me, I think, 4 review copies last year, and I read 2 of them quite quickly, and it's taken me a little bit longer to get round to this and the other one, which is White Teeth by Zadie Smith, I believe, which is still sat on my shelf. But I'm really glad that I read this one and gave it a chance, and I really, really enjoyed it. I'm really glad as well that I didn't know very much about it going into it, because I think if I had read the back properly I wouldn't have picked it up, because it is a book in part about an affair, and in general when I read books about affairs they tend to grate on me because I feel like they've been done before or they're not done very well. This one was done really well. This was very, very good. It follows a woman called Anne. She's 40, she lives with her husband and 2 children, and at the beginning of the book she learns that her father is about to die, and she sort of spends the book going between her home where she lives with her husband and Litchfield where her father lives, visiting him in the care home. He's not very lucid, he doesn't really know that she's there, but she spends a lot of time going back and forth, and while there she meets a man who used to be her father's neighbour, who is about the same age as her, and that things kind of go from there. One of the things I really liked about this book, I think my favourite thing about this book, is the theme of history and sort of how we preserve or don't preserve the past. Anne is a history teacher, as is David, the man she sort of starts this affair with, and a lot of the book looks at Anne kind of re-evaluating the way that she views the past and views history. She also spends a lot of time going through her father's things at the house and discovering lots of things about his life that she never knew about him, some of which her brother knew and she never did, which forces her to kind of reinterpret her own past. And meanwhile there is this old cottage that is in danger of being pulled down in the neighbourhood where she lives with her husband, and she sort of joins the fight to save it and tries to work out whether or not it ought to be saved, whether or not this crumbling down cottage, which is not fit for habitation, even though it is very, very old, whether that means that by just being old it has the merit to mean it needs to survive. There's just a lot of like really interesting themes going on under the surface here, and it was really, really great. I also just love the writing style. I should try and read some more Penelope Lively because I really like the way she writes. It's slightly detached, but never too detached, and she kind of slips in and out of characters' heads in a really brilliant way. It's a very different style, I would say, to 21st century novels. Like, it's only 40 years old, but it feels quite old in many ways, but what a brilliant read. I would highly recommend this one. Moving on to some more contemporary reads, this month I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This was a very weird book. I think I enjoyed it. I think I did. I don't have a physical copy as I've given it back to the friend who lent it to me, but it was a slightly weird one. I was inspired to read this after watching a review of it from Claire Reads Books, and I'll link her channel and her video on it down below, in which she compared it to Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, which I haven't read, but I'm also slightly curious to read. Convenience Store Woman is a Japanese novel, and it follows a young woman who works in a convenience store in a supermarket, and she likes it there, and she feels like she's part of a cog, and she really enjoys it. She's been working there part-time for more than 10 years, she's in her 30s. Her family and friends really don't understand why she's worked in the same, as they see, sort of dead-end job for all these years and doesn't have a boyfriend and isn't thinking about getting married or having children, and they just really don't understand that she's kind of fine as she is. And the book basically explores sort of the different social pressures on her in many ways, on her to do something with her life. I really enjoyed the themes of it and found it really, really fascinating, and I really liked the ending. I found the writing style quite odd. It's written in quite a weird way, and I don't know whether that is the translation in part, or whether it's the writing style that sort of comes from this first-person narration from this character who says that she doesn't really understand how other people think and other people work. So sometimes she says weird things or things that feel quite detached, but actually that is her character. She does feel quite detached from the people around her. And she also talks throughout the book about picking up sort of speech cues from other people and learning to recognise other people's sort of patterns of speech so that she can imitate them, and which I thought was really, really interesting. And she talks about how like everyone does this without noticing, but she does it consciously. Like, she's learning to sort of like add stock lines to her library so that she can say things to make her sound normal, which I thought was really, really interesting, and also is maybe partly bound up in why the writing style is a bit odd, but I still really, really enjoyed it. So it's an odd one, but I would recommend it. It's quite short, it won't take you very long, and it is really interesting, and I think a really sort of fascinating commentary and sort of social critique of particular sort of social pressures on people and the way that in many ways society expects people to follow a certain path or a certain pattern, or at least one of a few certain paths in life, and don't really understand people who don't fit into that mould. So yeah, definitely an interesting read. Then also read Radiance by Catherine M. Valente, which is probably my favourite book of the month and an absolute joy to read. I did a full review on this because I had so much to say, and I'm going to link that down below, and I'm very, very enthusiastic there, I promise. And also explain a lot more about what this book is about, because it's quite hard to explain it in a few sentences. It is brilliant, and it's very, very full, and I don't know how Catherine M. Valente managed to pack this much into this book and make it work. This is a kind of literary science fiction noir book about films, which explores the disappearance of a young woman called Severin Unk, who disappeared while on the planet Venus, where she had gone to film a documentary, because in this world humans live on lots of different planets in space, but also it's like the 1930s, 40s to 60s. And it's also told in a really interesting, unusual structure consisting of diary entries, film transcripts and scripts, and interviews. It's brilliant, it's odd, I don't know how she does it, but it works fantastically. It's such a brilliant read. I would give it 50 pages or so to let yourself fully get into it, because it is a little bit hard to get to grips with at first, but it is amazing. Like, I don't know how she does such fantastic world building within this small book, and also makes it moving and poignant and fascinating, makes all of these characters who you're always seeing at sort of many steps removed, makes all of them so compelling and so fully fledged. Like, it's just brilliant. I can't wait to read more by Catherine Valente. She is very, very talented. I am very impressed. I then also read The High Lord by Trudy Canavan, which is the third book in the Black Magician trilogy. I really like Trudy Canavan, and I've been reading this series over the space of about 3 or 4 years. I think I read the second one a year ago, and I don't know how long it was between the first 2 books, but I really like the series as a whole. I can't talk too much about the third one specifically because it is the third in the series, but the series basically follows a young woman called Sonia, who in this fantasy world is from a very lower class background, but is discovered to have great magical powers. And in this world, usually only people from the upper classes are allowed to become magicians, but Sonia is so strong that she ends up kind of getting caught up in the magic world. Anyway, this is the third book, everything comes to a head, it's very dramatic and really, really well done. One thing I have to say about Trudy Canavan is she is the master of pacing. Like, this book is superbly paced. I don't always think her writing is perfect, but her pacing is on point. It's brilliant. I also think her characterisation is really, really good, and she explores really, really interesting themes and uses fantasy to explore a lot of themes that are sort of relatable and relevant to the real world as well. I really, really enjoyed this, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading more by Trudy Canavan in the future. I think this is the 6th thing I've read by her. Yeah, I've read 2 of her trilogies now. I also read 2 books in August for younger readers, one for very, very little readers and one for slightly bigger / middle grade readers. The first was Luna and Franklin Go to the Moon by Jen Campbell. This is Jen Campbell's new picture book. I will link Jen's channel down below. If you don't know, she also has a booktube channel as well as being a writer in various forms. And Thames and Hudson very kindly sent me a copy of this. It's absolutely beautiful. The illustrations are really, really lovely. Look how beautiful they are. The dragon is amazing. I feel like the title is pretty self-explanatory for what happens in this book. It's wonderfully written, it's beautifully illustrated, and definitely worth a read and perhaps a gifting to little people in your life. The middle grade book I read in August is Coraline by Neil Gaiman, which I really, really enjoyed. This looks at a little girl called Coraline who's just moved to a new house. She doesn't really like it there, and she discovers that in one room in this house there is a door which doesn't lead anywhere. Most of the time, except sometimes when it does. In true Neil Gaiman style, it is quite creepy, but really, really good. There's something about the way Neil Gaiman writes, I found, in this and also in The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is another book of his, which I love. And they both have very similar vibes, in fact. He's very good at writing books that are very creepy, but where also you feel somehow comforted or like things are going to be okay, at least in some way. Coraline is also a really, really wonderful character, and I really love the way she's written. I also like that this is a book in many ways about a child trying to save their parents. I feel like, especially because in a lot of middle grade and YA, parents are like quite absent. It's quite nice that this book is a book about a child trying to save her parents from some danger, which I thought was just done really, really well. So yeah, I would highly recommend this. It was really, really good fun. Also, this edition has illustrations by Chris Riddell, which are absolutely amazing and just made me so happy. Like, as a child, I used to love the Edge Chronicles, which were illustrated by Chris Riddell, and they were like my favourite book series. They were my favourite things to read, and just seeing the illustrations in this really brought back memories of the Edge Chronicles, so that was good as well. I then also read 2 non-fiction books this month, both biographies actually, which I feel is fairly rare for me. The first one I read was Lady Constance Lytton, Aristocrat, Suffragette, Martyr by Lindsay Jenkins. This is a biography of Lady Constance Lytton, who was a significant suffragette and a really, really interesting person actually. Lady Constance spent the bulk of her life as a very kind of conventional Victorian old maid until one day she met suffragettes and sort of changed the way she looked at the world and became a very radical suffragette. And it's a really, really fascinating book, really, really well written, very well researched, really, really engaging and interesting, but in general drawing a really balanced account of Lady Constance's life. It was really, really interesting and definitely worth a read, and has made me keen to read more non-fiction about the suffragettes. And I also finally did read Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. This was on my TBR for Jane Austen July, and I had it reserved in the library for a very long time before it came in, but it did come in and I did read it, and it was excellent. It was so good. I love Lucy Worsley. She writes brilliantly. This is the best biography of Jane Austen I've read. I haven't read that many, but I have read a few, and this is definitely the best and the one I would heartily recommend. It's called Jane Austen at Home, and it does look at the different places in which Austen lived and kind of looks at her sense of home and a bit about ideas of home in her fiction, but it is at its heart a biography. It goes through Jane Austen's life and talks about her relationships with her family and her writing, and it's just so enjoyable. And I say this as someone who's read biographies before, who's read the majority of Jane Austen's letters, who used to work at the Jane Austen Centre in Bath. Like, I know a lot about her life, I knew a lot of this already, and it was still such a sheer joy to read. Lucy Worsley inserts just the right amount, never too much, of her own sort of personality and connection with Jane Austen, and she also provides sort of the perfect amount, I think, of historical and social context for everything going on in Jane Austen's life. It's full of interesting details. You can tell that Lucy Worsley not only loves Jane Austen, but also loves history, loves the Georgian and the Regency period, finds them fascinating to write about. It's such a moving and powerful read. It's interesting, although Charles Dickens is my favourite author in the sense that I love his books the most and I enjoy his books the most, and although, like, I tend to say Gaskell and Austen are tied, and I think on balance I prefer Gaskell's books, like, I enjoy them slightly more, but Jane Austen is the author with which I feel the most, like, strong emotional connection, which I think is partly just, like, because I used to work at the Jane Austen Centre, and therefore I know much more about Jane Austen's life than I do about any of my other favourite authors. And I read the end and I just, like, wept on the train, like, and she died 101 years ago. But I'm still slightly devastated. I would highly, highly recommend this for fans of Jane Austen. You shouldn't read it unless you've read all of Jane Austen because there are spoilers and so on, but it is a really, really brilliant read. So enjoyable, and yeah, I love Lucy Worsley a lot, and I love Jane Austen even more. Would highly recommend this one. There we have it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of August. Please let me know down in the comments what you read in August and how your reading month was, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.